It's easy to think Watch Dogs 1 is a story rooted entirely in urban chaos, flashing screens, and citywide surveillance. But one part of Aiden Pearce's life that players almost never talk about sits far outside the concrete environment people associate with the game. Long before the events of Watch Dogs 1, Aiden spent portions of his childhood and teen years moving between relatives, small towns, and temporary homes. The game doesn't give us full cutscenes of this time, but it leaves small, overlooked breadcrumbs that completely reframe Aiden's personality. And these clues come not from Chicago, but from the quieter, rural outskirts of his upbringing. We know through in-game audio logs and notebook-style collectibles that Aiden didn't grow up in a stable environment. One detail most players skip is that he wasn't raised exclusively in a big city. Instead, he bounced around, spending years in smaller communities where he learned early on how to observe people, judge their intentions, and adapt quickly. This transient lifestyle forced him to rely on his own instincts instead of any real support system, and this is where his distrust of institutions first began. Long before CTOS ever existed, the irony is that his ability to navigate Chicago later in life comes from understanding what life looks like without any of that infrastructure. Another overlooked detail is that Aiden's fascination with technology didn't start in a high-tech environment. It started during those years outside major urban centers. One collectible mentions his uncle bringing home old electronics from job sites. These weren't advanced systems. They were scrap radios, broken appliances, and outdated computers Aiden learned by repairing junk, not by sitting in a modern workshop. This explains his improvisational hacking style in Watch Dogs 1. He's not a sleek, corporate-trained code expert. He's someone who grew up reverse engineering whatever he could get his hands on. That's why he thinks differently from characters like Clara or T-Bone. They were shaped by tech hubs and hacker circles. Aiden was shaped by isolation, boredom, and necessity. There's also the emotional aspect of those early rural or semi-rural years. Aiden's deep attachment to family, especially his fierce protectiveness, makes much more sense when we understand that he grew up without a consistent one. The stability he eventually found with his sister Nicole wasn't just comforting, it was the first anchor he'd ever had. That's why losing Lena, even indirectly, shatters him so profoundly. People often interpret Aiden as overly vengeful or cold. But when you overlay the reality of a childhood spent moving from place to place, with little structure or safety, his obsession with protecting what little family he had left becomes much more understandable. Even his self-imposed solitude in Watch Dogs, one ties back to these rarely discussed early experiences. Aiden learned early that forming attachments meant eventually losing them. He grew up watching temporary guardians, temporary towns, and temporary friends come and go. That conditioned him to stay detached, something that becomes painfully obvious in the way he interacts with DedSec, with Clara, and even with Jordy.